All right, folks, we have some positive news finally on the war and peace front here. It seems that negotiations to end the Ukraine war are beginning. Donald Trump truths out on Truth Social. I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, AI, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. It's pretty long. We're not reading all that. Free Palestine. But shout out to Dave DeCamp, who summarizes it quite well in this article. Everybody, obviously, check out antiwar.com. I'm sure most of you already do, but obviously a great resource. Trump speaks with Putin, says talks to end Ukraine war will start immediately. President Trump said on Wednesday that he had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin and that negotiations to end the war in Ukraine would begin immediately. The president wrote on Truth Social that he and Putin agreed to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. Trump added, "We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now." Trump said he directed Secretary of State Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to lead the negotiations. Missing from his list, and this is odd, was General Keith Kellogg, who Trump appointed as the envoy to the conflict. So the envoy seemed to have been sidelined. I guess he was too hawkish, perhaps. Later in the day, the president said he might meet with Putin soon in Saudi Arabia. Man, imagine if Putin comes to the United States. I mean, I guess technically he could, since we are not signatories to the Rome Statute because he's wanted by the ICC, but he could come here because we don't care about war criminals. Yeah, because we do a lot of war crimes, so that wouldn't matter, right? Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president, but it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost, Trump said. He has repeatedly said the real death toll in Ukraine is in the millions, much higher than what it's been reported, but it is well into the hundreds of thousands. It is a grotesque death toll, even if it's not technically in the millions. After speaking with Putin, Trump said that he also had a call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about reaching a peace deal. The conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants to make peace, he wrote on Truth Social. Imagine Putin comes to the United States. Imagine covering that lib protest when Putin comes to the United States. It's amazing. There was a tweet. It was fake. The thing is, a lot of what you see on X is not real. Like if you see breaking news, unless it's sourced, you have to be skeptical because people make shit up. They made up that
I have noticed
Putin...
since
Go ahead.
Look, we always want to be fair. Partly it could be that a lot of the libs have run to blue sky. But it does seem since the election, if I go to look at a trending topic, you got to really look for any dissenting opinion that's not a MAGA opinion. Like everything. Your first 50 hits is all MAGA.
So somebody put, this was not a real story apparently, but breaking, Putin wants to prosecute Fauci. And so imagine if Donald Trump hands Anthony Fauci to Vladimir Putin to be prosecuted. That's be the ultimate lib own. There's no bigger lib own than that. Like you can't own the libs any harder than Donald Trump surrendering Fauci to Putin.
I mean, if he
spends the rest of his life in a Russian prison.
If he surrendered Joy Reid.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. After speaking with, oh no, we got that already. All right. I just spoke to President Volodymyr Zelensky, so here's the full tweet. This one is not as long, so we'll read this. The conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants to make peace. We discussed a variety of topics having to do with the war, but mostly the meeting that is being set up on Friday in Munich, where Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead the delegation. I'm hopeful that the results of that meeting will be positive. It's time to stop this ridiculous war where there has been massive and totally unnecessary death and destruction. God bless the people of Russia and Ukraine. So, DD Geopolitics tweets out this clip. This sort of just sets up the sort of macro framework here. Do you consider Ukraine as an equal participant in this peace process.
Do you expect Ukraine?
Say it, what?
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace.
We will continue to be
I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
All right, no lies detected there. Here's another major sticking point here. Do you oppose NATO membership for Ukraine? Trump saying, I don't think it's practical to have it personally.
NATO membership for Ukraine.
I don't think it's practical to have it personally. I know that a new Secretary of Defense who's excellent, Pete, made a statement today saying that he thinks it's unlikely or impractical. I think probably that's true. I think long before President Putin, they said there's no way they'd allow that. This has been going on for many, many years. They've been saying that for a long time, that Ukraine cannot go into NATO. And I'm okay with that. I just want the war, whether they are or they're not. But it certainly would seem to be that most people have said that that is something that's not going to happen.
So we do have a more elaborate statement here from Pete Hegseth, spoke on Ukraine's borders and possible NATO membership. So he adds not only are they likely not to be joining NATO, but obviously that they are going to have to make some territorial concessions. None of these, by the way, are new terms. These were all terms they could have agreed to before the war began and saved all of this unnecessary bloodshed. Sorry, did you have something?
Well, they wouldn't have had to give up territory either. I just want to point out.
Well, they would have had to recognize independence of those separatist regions in the east.
But now Russia.
But yeah, they wouldn't have lost what they. Right, exactly. Yeah.
I just want to point out part of the reason that Democrats complaining about lack of transparency or the arbitrary nature of this administration, part of the reason they're not landing is because the Biden administration literally propped up a sundowning old man and kept him away from the cameras and the microphones and refused to admit it to the public. So much so that seeing a president who rather frequently answers questions from the press is kind of jarring. We haven't seen in so many years a president in front of the press like that. So then you're going to come and say, this administration is not transparent. Well, I mean, by comparison, you could argue it's far more transparent than the one that preceded it.
Well, this is partly why, and I mean, there are multiple reasons for this, including more thematic political dynamics, but people have made the observation that part of why Trump struggled to gain a foothold in his first term is because he was preceded by Obama, who looked pretty competent compared to Trump. Like Trump stacked up kind of weak next to Obama, but he stacks up great next to Biden, right?
Sure.
Because people haven't had a president who they actually hear from on a regular basis in 4 years. Right.
It's kind of amazing. You're watching this and like, God, when Biden didn't ever do that from the beginning. This guy does
it every day, multiple times a day.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So here's Hegseth laying out some more terms, putting some more meat on the bone here.
Approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. President Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is a top priority. We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
All right. Now, Caitlin Johnston kind of reiterates what so many of us have been saying. And for me personally, just as someone who does content for a living, I have to say Ukraine is one of my least favorite topics to cover just because I've been saying the same exact thing about it for now 3 years straight. You know, where, I mean, we've said the same thing generally about Gaza and Israel-Palestine, but there are breaking developments that open up corners into different conversations. This has been my take from before the war started as someone who knew very little about this. Everyone who knew anything about anything said from the very beginning of the war that this would happen. Mearsheimer warned in 2015 that the West was leading Ukraine down the primrose path and that the result would be Ukraine getting wrecked. So much easily avoidable death. So obviously this war looks like it's going to be settled on terms that would have prevented it from happening in the first place, which means all of this for absolutely nothing. Nothing. We devastated Ukraine. Now, most of us have been saying this for the past few years, but some of us, like John Mearsheimer, have been saying this for longer than that. So here he is in 2015. We'll play this embedded video. This is 2015.
I actually think that what's going on here is that the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path. And the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is neutralizing Ukraine and then building it up economically and getting it out of the competition between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side, is the best thing that could happen to the Ukrainians. What we're doing is...
Commie. Pussy. Don't you know we need to agitate World War III and get an entire generation of men killed? Right.
Of course.
Encouraging the Ukrainians to play tough with the Russians. We're encouraging the Ukrainians to think that they will ultimately become part of the West because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side. And of course, the Ukrainians are playing along with this. And the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And what we're doing is, in effect, encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our interest to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. It certainly would be in Russia's interest to do so. And most importantly, it would be in Ukraine's interest to put an end to the crisis. Thank you.
That's in 2015. That's before any of the shit libs with the lawn signs and the Ukraine flags in the window knew anything about this whatsoever.
Yep.
Long before they knew anything about this whatsoever. And wow, if only that advice had been followed. Now, in the meantime, Jackson Hinkle tweets, Trump confirms, as later in that press conference, of course, that U.S. aid to Ukraine will continue until terms are agreed upon.
We're getting security on our money. We're going to have it secured by, they have rare earth and they have oil and gas and they have a lot of other things. And we're asking for security on our money.
So does it mean you are not sending any more
They've agreed to
aid
it. Ukraine has agreed to it.
Does it mean you are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
When would the U.S. stop sending funding? When would the U.S. stop sending funding?
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won. We're the thing that's holding it back. And frankly, we'll go as long as we have to go because we're not going to let the other happen.
Now, look, I don't know what the wisdom of that is. What he's thinking is we have to keep the aid going and flowing until we get a deal because otherwise we're likely to get a worse deal than we would had we funded them. I don't know what the wisdom is in that, but I think what he's thinking there is that until there is a peace plan that is inked and a ceasefire in writing, we have to keep pressure up. I mean, I don't know what the wisdom of that is. I don't want any more people dying in this war that is now in the last days. Imagine being the last person to die.
It's the John Kerry line.
That's the John Kerry line. Who's the last person who's asked to die for a mistake? But, I mean, that is probably conventional wisdom that you have to keep the aid going until you get a deal. Hopefully it happens right now. Hopefully it happens as quickly as possible, because this is something that is one of the great crimes of this century. Obviously, Gaza is a great crime, and this is a great crime as well. This was totally foreseeable, as that Mearsheimer clip shows. People knew that this was going to happen, and this is an extremely, just a devastating war with so much loss of life on both sides. And it never had to happen. It never had to happen. And, this is an example of why we said, during the campaign, there's no real lesser evil. But if this could have gone to a nuclear war, and maybe would have gone to a nuclear war under Kamala Harris, this is that example of the sixth chamber of the gun being empty in a case of Donald Trump. I think Trump is probably going to be far worse on domestic policy, in the looting of the Treasury by Doge and the shredding of the social safety net. But I think on foreign policy, when it comes to this decision, yeah, this would not have happened under Kamala Harris. You'd have had a continuation of the same just brutal and nonsensical policy of just running bodies through a meat grinder. Right. At best. At worst, this would have escalated into a nuclear war. And so, obviously, this is welcome news.
This is one of the areas where I found the bone deep ignorance of liberals most infuriating with their Ukraine flags in their bios. It just drove me insane. I traveled around the country a lot over the last couple of years, and it was always in upscale lib neighborhoods. You'd see the Ukraine flag chalked on the sidewalk. You'd see it in people's windows and on their porches. And if you ask these people, because they watched it on the CNN, they would think they had some kind of an idea of what the fuck they were talking about. Yeah. And most of these people would never have even heard of Mearsheimer.
Right, exactly.
Never heard of John Mearsheimer. They never even would have heard the argument. They never would have heard of the Maidan coup. They knew nothing about any of this, when it was very obvious to people like you. You're like the Rolling Stones with this. You don't want to play Satisfaction in concert anymore. You're over it. You've played it too many times. But yeah, no, who are we? We have no access to any special information. Who's Caitlin Johnston? What do you think? She gets access to the White House Daily Briefing? Everybody knew that it could only end this way. It was only a question of how much death you were going to get. And this is why arguments about Hegseth's experience were always, any argument like that coming from supporters of the institutions that they've been propping up, that the liberals have been propping up, is ridiculous. I would literally rather grab a bus driver and make him the Secretary of Defense than to have Blinken in that job, or to have Lloyd Austin in that job. What were they doing with their expertise? What were they doing with their experience?
No, they were agitating for World War III. That is their expertise. That's what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. You needed somebody who's not part of that establishment to come in, and as much as all of these people are owned by AIPAC. It is sad, because you look at what their instinct and their impulse is in regards to a country that doesn't own them, that doesn't have the financial and political resources to compromise their judgment in the way that Israel does. This is exactly, if we had designed a peace plan, this is basically what it would have been, right? I mean, I have absolutely no point of exception with this. The rare earth stuff, honestly, I don't know enough about it. I've seen some people be critical about it. I can't comment on that. But the overall comments of no NATO, you're not getting these regions back, this is exactly what a lot of people have been advocating for years. What if they applied that same logic to Israel? What could these people get done? It is just tragic that they're so owned by this one country.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, in terms of the rare earth stuff, I mean, I think that is putting the cart a little bit before the horse. Let's see if a deal gets done. Let's see if this moves into phase 2, quote unquote, which apparently these talks are going to happen between Trump's team and Zelensky tomorrow. And so by Sunday, we should certainly have more news on this. But on the media side of things, this is literally an example where the more media you consumed about this issue, the less informed you were.
Yes,
The dumber you
absolutely.
were. Like, you'd be better off consuming no media. If I brought my kid in here, who's going to be 6 years old in a month, and showed him a map of Russia and Ukraine, I said, these countries are going to fight. Which one's going to win? You point to Russia
Right.
because it's, 5 times the size.
Right.
That's all you needed to
The
know.
baby would know.
Right, the baby would know. My 6-month-old would know. Never mind my 6-year-olds. No, the baby would know.
Well, that's what Mark Twain said. If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you read it, you're misinformed.
Yeah, you're misinformed. Exactly. So you'd have a better grasp of this war knowing nothing, just looking at a map, than you would consuming mainstream media about this war. That's
Well,
literally
and-
true.
and-
That's
and
not
this
an
is-
exaggeration.
And this is yet another case. How many times can the media prove itself to be a completely defective product that cannot be relied on before these people reject it? When I see some of the arguments they're making about journalism is under assault and it's very dangerous to have these oligarchs concentrate the flow of information that way, I agree with that. But you can't make a case for CNN. You can't make a case for ABC. You can't make a case for the Washington Post. You can't make that part of your case. Jesus Christ, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. These
Right.
are the things they describe as independent journalism. When they try, yes, it is very dangerous. I'm already saying I see on X how they're manipulating the conversation around Medicaid and Medicare. They're being careful not to talk too much about Social Security yet, but it's coming. It's coming. Yes, that is dangerous, but where do you turn? Where do you turn? To the legacy media? It's because they have failed so thoroughly, in part, that these people are now in power.
Right. Yep. Agreed.
Please clap.